You know that moment when someone you love walks into a room and before they say a word, before they even look at you, you can feel that something's wrong? Or when you're sitting in silence with a friend and suddenly you both start laughing because somehow the same ridiculous thought landed in both your heads at the exact same time? We call these moments coincidence. We call them intuition. We call them being close to someone. But we rarely stop to ask what's actually happening in those moments. Because if our minds are supposed to be private, sealed off, entirely our own, then these experiences shouldn't be possible. We grow up believing consciousness lives inside the skull, that thoughts belong to us alone, that the boundary of the self is the boundary of the skin. And most of the time, that story works. But every now and then, something slips through. A feeling that doesn't belong to you but somehow becomes yours. A mood that spreads through a room like weather. A connection so immediate it feels less like communication and more like recognition. Science has started paying attention to these moments, and what it's finding is strange. Not mystical, not supernatural, just strange in the way reality is strange when you look closely enough. Brains synchronizing during conversation. Neural patterns mirroring between people who care about each other. Emotional states transmitting faster than language ever could. This isn't a story about telepathy or proving anything supernatural. It's about something quieter and maybe more profound. The possibility that the mind isn't quite as private as we've been taught to believe. That consciousness might be less like a locked room and more like a field that overlaps, resonates, and breathes between us. So if you've ever felt truly seen by another person or sensed someone's presence before they arrived, or wondered why certain people feel like home while others feel like strangers, maybe you've been noticing something real all along. If that sounds worth exploring, I'm glad you're here. And if you want to keep questioning reality with people who take these things seriously, consider subscribing. Let's see where this goes. We take it for granted that our thoughts are ours alone, that what happens inside your head stays inside your head. It's one of those assumptions so basic we never think to question it. The mind feels like the most private space we have, a place no one else can enter, a space that belongs entirely to us. But then you walk into a room and the tension is so thick you can feel it before anyone says a word. Or you spend an afternoon with someone anxious and by evening their restlessness has become yours, even though nothing happened to you. Or you're talking with a friend and you finish each other's sentences not because you're trying to, but because somehow you're riding the same wave of thought. These moments are so common we barely notice them. We just call it being around people. But if the mind is truly private, sealed, isolated, these things shouldn't happen at all. Psychologists have known for decades that emotions spread between people like contagion. You don't decide to catch someone's mood. It just happens. One person's fear ripples through a crowd. One person's calm settles a room. There's a term for it, emotional contagion. And it's not metaphorical, it's measurable. Your nervous system actually mirrors the states of the people around you, and especially people you're close to, without you choosing it or even noticing. Then there's something even stranger. Researchers studying couples, friends, parents, and children have found that when people spend time together, especially in silence or deep conversation, their brains start to sync. Not just their behavior, their actual neural activity. The electrical rhythms in one brain begin to match the rhythms in another. It's called Interbrain synchronization, and it happens most powerfully between people who trust each other. Think about that for a second. Two separate brains, two separate nervous systems falling into the same pattern. Not because they're thinking the same thought, but because connection itself seems to create a shared frequency. This isn't some fringe idea. It's been demonstrated with EEG, fMRI, all the tools neuroscience has. And the findings keep pointing in the same direction. The boundary between your mind and someone else's mind is far more porous than we ever imagined. So maybe the question isn't whether minds connect. Maybe the question is, why did we ever believe they didn't? We've built an entire culture around the idea of the individual, the independent self, the private inner world. And there's truth in that. You are distinct. You have your own experiences, your own history, your own perspective. But distinctness and separation aren't the same thing. You can be yourself and still be woven into something larger. The mind might be less like a fortress and more like a river that flows into other rivers without losing what it is. If that's true, then every relationship you've ever had has shaped not just your life, but the structure of your consciousness itself. Here's where it gets specific. In the last couple of decades, neuroscientists developed a technique called hyperscanning. It's exactly what it sounds like, scanning two brains at the same time while people interact. And what they found is quietly unsettling in the best way. When two people have a real conversation, not a scripted one, not a polite exchange, but an actual back and forth where both people are present, their brain activity starts to align. The neural oscillations, the rhythms of electrical activity that pulse through the brain begin to sync up. Not perfectly, not like clones, but enough that you can see it on the scan. Two minds moving together. It happens between romantic partners just sitting in silence. It happens between teachers and students when learning clicks. It happens between friends who've known each other for years. The closer the relationship, the stronger the synchronization. And here's the strange part. This synchrony doesn't just happen during conversation. It happens during shared attention, during cooperation, even during rest. When two people are simply near each other, your brain is constantly building models of the people in your life. It's predicting what they'll say, how they'll react, what they're feeling before they show it. And the better you know someone, the more accurate those predictions become. It's like your mind carries a simulation of them inside it, a version of their patterns, their rhythms, their way of being. And when you're together, those patterns start to resonate. This is what the social brain does. It doesn't just process other people as objects out there in the world. It treats them as part of its own landscape. There's even a theory called social baseline theory that suggests the brain's default state isn't isolation, it's connection. Being alone actually takes extra work. The nervous system evolved to assume the presence of others, to distribute the load of being alive across relationships. You were never designed to carry everything by yourself, which raises a question science doesn't quite know how to answer yet. Why does the brain do this? Why does it treat connection as its baseline? Why does synchrony happen at all? One possibility is that it's just efficient. Coordinating with others helps us survive. Another possibility is that it's deeper than strategy, that maybe consciousness isn't a solo phenomenon, that maybe awareness itself is something that happens between us, not just within us. The data doesn't tell us which one is true, but it does tell us this: when you feel close to someone, when you say you're on the same wavelength, when you describe a connection as effortless, you're not imagining it. Something real is happening. Your brains are literally falling into rhythm, two separate systems becoming one pattern. And if that's possible between two people, what happens when the field gets bigger? Watch a flock of starlings move across the sky at dusk, thousands of birds turning, twisting, flowing like liquid. No leader, no plan, just each bird responding to the 7 closest neighbors. And somehow, out of those simple interactions, a collective intelligence emerges. A pattern that none of the individual birds could create alone. Bees do it, wolves do it, ants do it. They coordinate without a central brain giving orders. The group behaves as if it has a mind of its own, and in a sense, it does. Not a mind like ours, but something distributed. Something that exists in the space between individuals rather than inside any one of them. We like to think humans are different, that we're too complex, too individual for that kind of collective behavior. But we're not. You felt it in a concert when the entire crowd moves as one, in a protest when thousands of people share the same urgency, in a moment of collective grief or collective joy when an entire city seems to breathe together. These aren't just social experiences, they're moments when individual consciousness blurs into something larger. And the thing is, we don't just experience this in big, dramatic gatherings. It happens quietly, constantly, in every room we enter, every conversation we have, every relationship we hold. Some researchers have started wondering if human connection generates a kind of field. Not a mystical field, a measurable one. Electromagnetic activity from the heart and brain radiates outward. It's weak, but it's there. And when people are close, those fields overlap. We don't know yet if that overlap does anything. But the fact that it exists at all is strange enough. Ancient philosophies intuited this long before we had the tools to measure it. Buddhism speaks of Indra's net, an infinite web where every point reflects every other point. Ubuntu from Southern Africa says that a person is a person through other people. You are because we are. Taoism saw interdependence as the fundamental nature of reality. These weren't just metaphors. They were observations about how life actually works. Modern philosophy has started circling back to the same idea. There's a theory called the extended mind, which suggests that cognition doesn't stop at the skull, that tools, environments, other people all become part of the thinking process. Your mind isn't contained. It's distributed across everything you interact with. And maybe that's what connection really is. Not two separate things reaching toward each other, but two expressions of a field that was always shared. Consciousness as something that flows between us, through us, shaped by proximity and presence and care. It's easy to dismiss this as too abstract, too poetic. But look at your own life. Think about the people who changed you just by being near you. Think about how your thoughts shift depending on who you're with. Think about the version of yourself that only exists in the presence of certain people. That's not metaphor. That's your mind responding to a field it's always been part of. If this is true, if minds really do extend into each other, then maybe the deepest question isn't about connection at all. Maybe it's about identity, about where you end and where someone else begins, and whether that boundary was ever as clear as you thought. There's a loneliness that comes from believing you're the only one inside your own mind. That no matter how close you get to someone, there's always a wall, a final distance that can't be crossed. And maybe that's why connection feels so profound when it happens. Because for a moment, the wall dissolves. For a moment, you're not alone in there. But what if the loneliness was the illusion, not the connection? What if you've never actually been alone inside your mind because your mind has never been a sealed container in the first place? Every person you've ever loved has left a mark on the way you think. Not just in memory, in structure, in pattern. The people who raised you shaped the rhythms of your nervous system. The friends who saw you clearly changed what you believe is possible. The relationships that broke you open rearranged how you perceive the world. You are, in a very real sense, made of the people you've been close to. That's not loss of self, that's what self is. A conversation, a process, something that only exists in relation to others. Some people feel like home the first time you meet them, and maybe that's because your nervous system recognizes a resonance it's been waiting for, a frequency it can rest into. Connection isn't something you build from scratch, it's something you remember, a tuning in, a return to a state the body has always known. Your loneliness might not be about the absence of people, it might be about the absence of resonance. About being surrounded by others but never syncing, never finding the rhythm that lets you stop working so hard to be a self. Because being a self in isolation is exhausting. The brain wasn't designed for it. Think about the people who've shaped you most, not the ones who taught you facts or gave you advice. The ones whose presence changed the quality of your inner life. The ones you could sit with in silence and feel more like yourself than you do alone. Those people didn't just matter to you, they became part of the architecture of your awareness. And here's what that means. If minds are relational, if they extend into each other, if consciousness itself is something that happens between us, then you're not separate from the people you love. You're woven into them. They carry pieces of you. You carry pieces of them. So the question isn't whether you're connected, the question is whether you've been noticing it. Whether you've been paying attention to the moments when the boundary between self and other gets thin, when you stop being just you and become part of something that breathes together. Because that's not a rare experience. That's what connection has always been. So maybe the mind was never meant to be a private island. Maybe it was always meant to be a shore where waves meet. A place where the boundary between inside and outside is less like a wall and more like a membrane. You are distinct, yes. You have your own history, your own way of seeing. But distinctness doesn't mean separation. A wave is distinct from the ocean, but it's still made of water. It still rises and falls with everything around it. If there's one thing worth taking from all of this, it's not a conclusion, it's a feeling. The sense that when you connect deeply with another person, you're not imagining it, you're not projecting, you're not just being sentimental. Something real is happening, something your body has always known, and your mind is only now beginning to notice. The people you've been close to live inside you in ways you'll never fully untangle, and you live inside them the same way. Not as memory, as presence, as pattern, as a rhythm that keeps playing long after the moment has passed, which means you've never been as alone as you thought, and you never will be. The mind extends, it overlaps, it resonates, And maybe the strangest, most beautiful thing about being human is that we get to experience both sides of that truth. The singular perspective of being you, and the quiet, undeniable knowing that you are also part of something much larger, something that has always been connected, something that was never separate to begin with. Before you go, I'm curious, have you ever had a moment where you felt genuinely connected to someone without words? Like your minds were somehow on the same frequency? Leave a comment and let me know. I read them all, and I'd love to hear your experience. And if this kind of exploration resonates with you, if you want more videos that question reality with depth and sincerity, consider subscribing. We're building something here for people who take these questions seriously. There are 2 videos on screen right now that go even deeper into the nature of consciousness and connection. Pick whichever one calls to you. Let's keep going.